In this video, I'll be talking about OS2 and then make a brief but failed attempt at installing OS2 Warp 3.0 on my 386. Why? Well,
if you think Mac users are annoying, you should meet an Amiga user. And if you think Amiga users are loud about their preferences, you should be glad you don't know any OS2 users. A so-called friend convinced me to try OS2, so that's what I'll do.
as you might be able to tell from the chapter disposition, things didn't quite go so well. So most of this video will be background stuff on OS2. For a quick summary of the origins of OS2, IBM released their personal computer in 1981 after missing out on mini-computers. IBM was a market leader in the mainframe business, so they got a lot of uptake in the industry. As IBM was in a rush to get the PC out of the door, in fear of missing out on market computers like they had with mini-computers, it ended up being quite easy to clone. Aside from some firmware, their PC was built with components available on the open market. And cloned it was, to the point that IBM was losing its grip on the platform they had created. IBM quite liked being in control, and quite liked holding a large portion of the PC market. So they decided to do what they would have done with the PC from the start. More IBM specific hardware, more IBM specific software.
How you gonna do it? How? You're gonna PS to it with the IBM PS2.
Yeah, like that. This was the PS2 hardware platform and the new OS2 operating system. IBM did this with the assumption that they still led the industry and that cloners would have to follow in their footsteps. While this was a tremendous miscalculation on the hardware side, they got Microsoft on board to develop the new OS with the 1985 Joint Development Agreement. IBM was still quite powerful at the time, so it made sense for Microsoft to dance with them. The idea, which Microsoft was on board with, was to replace MS-DOS with OS2 for this next generation of hardware. This miscalculation on the hardware side was especially public when Compaq beat IBM to launching a PC compatible with the new 386 processor in 1986. Microsoft, meanwhile, continued to dabble with their Windows product in the meantime. But it wasn't really taking off, and it was mostly used as a bundled runtime for a few graphical applications. By the late 80s, Microsoft was considering dropping the Windows project and focusing fully on OS2. While Windows was complicating this joint development agreement, the general strategy became that Windows was reserved for low-end systems that just couldn't run OS2. This brings us to 1989, which is when the cracks in the IBM-Microsoft relationship starts appearing. OS2 1.2 has been released, and it was an alright 16-bit operating system, without a great general appeal. A big problem was that OS2 couldn't really multitask DOS applications convincingly, due to IBM prioritizing support for the 286 processor. OS2 ran in protected mode, which offered memory protection and was the intended way to break the 640K barrier. The problem was that the 286 is brain dead and couldn't be put back into real mode without resetting the processor, which is what DOS applications required, and this added a lot of overhead. This particular quirk of the 286 made it very unpopular with OS developers. On top of this, the PCs of the time didn't really have enough RAM to meaningfully multitask anyway. Running one application was taxing enough. As part of the Combs vs. Microsoft antitrust lawsuit, a number of internal documents were released. These can give us a glimpse into what was going on at the time and how the IBM-Microsoft split happened. Microsoft's public strategy around mid-89 appears to be that Windows will be the low-end graphical operating system, OS2 the serious business one. As part of its positioning, there was talk of delaying the 386 version of Windows 3. It's worth noting here that there was already a 386 version of Windows 2 available on the market. At this point, Windows user base was comparable with Macintosh. Microsoft did push this positioning quite hard, and IBM seemingly went with it. An IBM email to Microsoft referencing a Computer World article does show some doubt on Microsoft's commitment. Apparently, Microsoft communicated in that article that they weren't sure that the announced version of OS2 capable of running on 2 MB of RAM was even possible. An internal Microsoft email shows some strain regarding the corporate culture. This appears to be an argument about who's contributed the most to OS2 1.2, seemingly affecting how much money Microsoft gets. IBM seems to measure this with K-locks. I wonder if this is where Ballmer got so opinionated about K-locks. It's also looking like someone at IBM has picked up on Microsoft seemingly only doing Windows apps instead of porting them to OS2. It's already looking a bit shaky at this point at the end of '89. By February of 1990, Microsoft finds itself needing to pick a path. Microsoft occasionally had a systems division retreat, where key people would discuss strategy away from the office, like this one in February of 1990. It's clear that Microsoft is seeing potential in Windows, and they want to give it their best shot. From what I can read from this, Microsoft seemingly want to turn OS2 into an enterprise step-up from Windows. There is seemingly also some support for the idea of just leaving OS2 at IBM and Microsoft carry on in its own direction. By August, Microsoft had decided that they want to push the Windows API and nothing else. What Microsoft is referring to here as NT OS2 is the codebase that was supposed to become OS2 3.0. Microsoft retained ownership of this, and this would later become Windows NT. This change of strategy was something Microsoft wanted to keep secret. They wanted to dead-end Presentation Manager, the OS2 GUI API, leaving WinAPI as the way forward. IBM, meanwhile, are seemingly surprised by this new direction. They seem to have expected influence over the direction and marketing strategy of Windows, allowing them to prevent Windows from competing too much with OS2. It might seem strange that development of 2.0 and 3.0 would be split up in the first place, but the general idea seems to be that the 3.0 rewrite was needed to make OS2 portable to other CPU architectures. IBM, on the other hand, seems to be of a differing opinion, that the OS2 3.0 that Microsoft is developing won't be the successor to OS2 2.0. And at this point, IBM was hitting quite hard with its marketing of the upcoming OS2 2.0 release, to the point that Microsoft was kinda panicking about IBM having the better product, especially with the promise of running Windows-free applications, but with the stability of OS2. Microsoft did not like this new direction and decided to silently kill all future development of OS2 applications, but not publicly announce this. This even became active sabotage, with decisions specifically made to break compatibility with OS2 and to make it look worse. Here, Bill Gates is frustrated that they don't have anything cool to point to in Windows 3 that doesn't work on OS2. When Microsoft later found out that Windows 3.11 broke WinOS2, the Windows compatibility layer on OS2, they made it a high priority to push 3.11 to OEMs as quickly as possible. For a window in time here, between around 92 to the release of Windows 95, IBM had a superior product. Microsoft was fumbling and stumbling, trying and failing to match OS2. Microsoft had planned to squeeze OS2 between Windows 3 and NT, but the memory requirements of NT meant it wasn't going to take off anytime soon. If IBM's moment was going to happen, it was here. It was a strange time indeed. There was a fair bit of positive press about OS2, like this comparison of OS2 and Windows 3.1, which ranked OS2 favorably. You may have heard about the excessive memory requirements being the reason for the downfall of OS2, but they fixed that in Warp 3 and the hardware had caught up by then. If anything, I'd say IBM was in a better position than Microsoft in terms of memory use on a 32-bit operating system. The upcoming Windows 95 ran worse than Warp on 4 MB of RAM, and especially NT, which needed even more memory. Microsoft was really worried about the effects OS2 would have on Windows NT, as NT 3.1 needed a good 16 MB of RAM just to boot, and once it booted it ran like a dog. Enterprise also liked OS2 because it had the stability and network support needed, and a bigger selection of 32-bit applications than NT had before Windows 95 was released. It just didn't have a solid use case in the low end of the market, and pretty much all the computers already shipped with Windows 3 thanks to Microsoft's anti-competitive dealings. And Windows 3 was good enough for most users. Well, it was this and the driver situation. By Warp 3, OS2 had most of the important drivers, but it certainly slowed down the uptake in the 2.0 and 2.1 days. Warp also added a fairly competent and internet-ready network stack, so it was quite competitive feature-wise. There's a number of reasons why IBM failed with getting a wider market adoption. Marketing would be one. IBM famously failed to sell OS2 to even its own PC division. IBM also failed to get developers on board, so the lack of applications available was also something slowing down the uptake. Microsoft's anti-competitive methods certainly didn't help either. Microsoft would only offer the good licensing deals to OEMs that only shipped Windows. But I think OS2's fate was sealed the moment Microsoft decided to do their own thing and put WinAPI first. This wasn't just a betrayal that meant Microsoft was now a competitor to IBM, It also meant that Microsoft was siding with the clone vendors. At this very point, with Microsoft's already dominant market position on the OS market, IBM lost all leverage. I can't imagine a universe where IBM would be able to climb this mountain. Microsoft had developed and formulated Windows 95 with a specific goal of crushing OS2 once and for all, and they were quite successful with that. They didn't make Windows a better OS than OS2, but they cleared the gap to the point that OS2 wasn't clearly superior. And let's not forget, Microsoft was terrified of OS2. Now let's look at what came in the box for this copy of OS2.
So the contents of this box can basically be divided into 3 different categories of stuff. First, we have all of these loose leaves. This is some kind of license information about the Kodak Photo CD sampler, about how you can use the pictures and such. This appears to be some kind of license agreement for OS2 itself. This is some basic installation information for the bonus pack that is included. So basically, how to install it, what it comes with, so Information Manager, IBM Works, FaxWorks, HyperAccess, Internet Connection Kit, Multimedia Viewer, Video In, Person to Person, which I think is a video conferencing tool. And aside from that, there's just a quick blurb about each program. Yeah, so it's not actually a video conferencing tool, this thing. It's more of a way to share files and draw graphics and such. And the obligatory support numbers for CompuServe, because it's not IBM. And that's about it. We also got a voucher, if there is an upgraded version of OS2 Warp 3. That's how they know you're entitled to that. There's also a notice that if you're installing Warp on an IBM Aptiva, you need to call support first. I'm not sure what this is about. This is basically in the box of every OS2 Warp 3 copy that I've ever seen. I do know that OS2 2.0 and 2.1 had problems with Windows 3.11 and that the installation would basically fail, but that was fixed in Warp 3, so I'm not quite sure. But we have this notice as well, which basically tells you that you need to have your floppies ready if you're gonna use Windows 3.1 or 3.11. So there might be something about creating recovery floppies, I don't know. And also a quick notice about how to make backups from IBM's XDF floppies, which is an extended density format. And this is some sort of user registration, so that they will send you a newsletter. And this is the disclaimer. Yeah, the internet is all exciting and there's lots of information and yada yada yada. And there is offensive stuff on the internet. IBM does not encourage offensive stuff, but it's your problem if you're offended by it. And then this lovely little booklet telling you about every keyboard layout it supports and where the keys are. And this would be quite handy in general when you are using various dodgy Linux distribution and you're stuck using the American layout and you don't know where the buttons are. And we also got a list of all the code pages, basically which characters a certain code page can represent, which is important if you need to encode special characters. Thank you Unicode for making this obsolete. We then got the big booklet, the user manual. I have read this quite a bit, but it has a bunch of chapters about how to install OS2, how to use it. Some of the UI interactions are unusual if you come from a Windows world, so there's definitely use in reading this. And then there's also a big chapter about troubleshooting and basically how to handle all kinds of weird hardware that you might have, which I have. That's basically it. I couldn't imagine installing OS2 without this thing. finally, we have the disks. We have one of these is the boot disk and one of this is the installation disk. You need both of them. And then we got OS2 Warp on our CD-ROM, which is where the actual operating system is. And then we got the bonus pack. This is all the extra applications and stuff that came with OS2 Warp. I don't know if there was any copy of OS2 Warp that didn't come with a bonus pack. This was basically IBM's way of saying, well, now there are OS2 applications, so stop saying there aren't any OS2 applications.
Before we can begin the upgrade from Windows 3.11 to OS2, I need to clear out some space for it. From what I can tell, I need about 60 megabytes of free space, which is a lot given that my Windows partition is filled to the brim and is only 160 megabytes in size. I basically need to remove all of my games and Turbo C++, which I just installed. But eventually I get there. I still have some stuff to clean up. Windows complains during startup as it tries to load a Turbo C++ driver that just isn't present anymore. This involves manually editing system.ini. Aside from backing up my autoexec.bat and config.sys, there is one last thing I need to do before starting the upgrade, and that's detailed in the back of the manual. I have some special hardware, specifically my CD-ROM drive. It's a single-speed Mitsumi drive, and I've configured it for a non-standard I/O port in order to not conflict with a network card. I need to modify the second disk in order to tell the driver about my configuration. This in itself isn't hard, it's just something that needs to be done. But with that I can reboot from the first disk. It sits there loading for a while before asking for the second disk. Here it sits for a good long while taking some concerning pauses that make you think it has crashed or something. But eventually, we get to this screen. We're presented with two options, Quick Install or Custom. I select Quick Install, and immediately it starts copying files. Like, no confirmation, no more questions, just BAM, straight into the installation. As if it's worried I'll change my mind. And it's loading everything straight off the CD-ROM, so the driver is obviously working. One of the first things I'm noticing is how fast it seems to be. This driver must be a lot quicker than the one I've been using in DOS and Windows. It spends about 7 minutes at this step, showing text blurbs meanwhile. At this point it has already deactivated my MS-DOS install. When I get to the reboot step and select DOS in Lilo, it's straight into the OS2 boot screen. There is one slightly concerning error message at startup, but it continues past it. I think it's just one of the special CD-ROM drivers. We've now reached the graphical part of the installer. And the graphical installer starts with this driver screen. I have a look at a few of the drivers, like the printer. It appears though that it hasn't found a suitable driver for my video card, so I'll be stuck in 16 colors until I can find a suitable driver. But with that, we're at another copy screen. It spends another 10 minutes just copying files without further questions. We get past that, and I think it's getting to the driver installation step, where it starts installing a bunch of smaller packages. And this is where it all goes wrong. The installer segfaults. There's no recovering from this. It just sits there at the same screen until you reset it. When I tried rebooting, it just sits there at the boot screen. There is, as far as I could see, no way to resume an interrupted installation. So, what now? Well, I decided to try starting the installation over again. In fact, I tried starting it over twice. But before I could do that, I first had to delete some parts of this half-finished install, as there wasn't enough free space left anymore. Thankfully, you can get an OS2 command line from the installer. The first time I tried to reinstall, it hung during the text-based installer phase. The second time, I once again get a segmentation fault during the graphical part. I don't know how to proceed from here. Is this some sort of incompatibility with my system? Is it just the CD-ROM version of OS 2 being iffy? If I put myself into the shoes of someone using this computer for real work, I think this is the point where I would just bail on the endeavor. I'd like to revisit OS 2 in the future, but I don't think I'll be getting much further right now. But I can't really do a video about OS 2 without showing any of it in action. So I'll make an exception to my usual rule, and we'll have a quick tour of it in an emulator. So, let's pretend we have an OS 2 system that boots. Right. It boots into a desktop which look a bit like macOS. Being able to place icons and such on the desktop is a feature that dates back to OS 2 2.0 from 1992. But the little panel at the bottom is new in Warp. Minimized windows don't go onto the desktop. At first sight, they seemingly just disappear into the void. OS 2 is this strange combination of familiarity from Windows 3, while also being quite different. Icons are opened by double-clicking on them, and you close windows by double-clicking the system menu in the top left corner, so that's all familiar. Just like in Windows, you can customize the desktop background. There's an amazing amount of choice here, all of which make the icon text unreadable. Just like with the desktop, you can customize folders too. Not just its icon, but also the background. While the panel at the bottom of the screen has a button for opening the window list, it's still more convenient to use Ctrl Escape to bring it up, like in Windows 3. The little panel thing gets buried under all of your windows, and it's too big for you to even want it to stay on top. File management works through this tree view, where you can drill down into the directory you want to go to. When you find where you want to go, double-clicking that will bring up a detailed view. Selecting multiple files is done by dragging the mouse with the left button held down. Actually moving or copying is done by dragging with the right mouse button. As we can see in the file properties, OS 2 has an unusual take on a tabbed interface. This combined with each tab potentially having more than one page makes the discoverability a bit worse, I would say. One of the things I found notably quirky is how you create a folder and even copying files. Right click and select Create Another. It doesn't say folder anywhere, but sure. You get this bewildering dialog for selecting the target, with all your current open folder windows being options, as well as your desktop and just anywhere on the drives. You get a similar dialog for the copy and move options too. Finally, deleting stuff. You can either just right click and delete, or you can drag the file to the shredder. No recycle bin here. At IBM I guess they went straight to the confetti machine. I'm sure this is a familiar and comforting sound to them. Also shipped with Warp 3 was the bonus pack. A package containing goodies like a word processor, fax software, internet utilities and such. I tried the word processor and it was okay. It didn't have the document structure tools you'd expect from a more serious word processor, but it could apply styles to headings and such. I definitely got Microsoft Works vibes from it though. Serviceable for simpler documents, but nothing to write home about. At least it's some OS 2 native applications for those who have never seen one of those before. The Windows compatibility layer is enabled by installing DOS and Windows separately. OS 2 will then do things to this installation. Afterwards, you can start up Program Manager as a window inside the OS 2 workspace. I was able to get sound working in Windows by installing Sound Blaster Pro drivers via the control panel. The fact that Windows drivers somewhat works in this setup tells me that WinOS 2 is bolting Windows onto OS 2 in an unholy way that makes me a bit uncomfortable. That's not to say that there isn't any integration. The clipboard at least is somewhat synchronized between OS 2 and Windows applications. And it's all running on the same file system after all. The compatibility is supposedly pretty good, and you can play the old Windows game with sound. The Windows session does however block OS 2 programs from using sound. Warp 3 did come with some multimedia capabilities, but I won't be able to show them off well in 16 colors. As far as games go, you get Mahjong, chess and a solitaire game. I did find a Minesweeper clone in the Hobbs collection though. It's a bit more gruesome than the one you get in Windows. Oh, and all of this time, I've had a full-screen MS-DOS application running in the background, so mixing DOS, Windows and OS 2 sure does seem to work. Anyway, I think that concludes the tour. I struggled quite a bit with using this OS, but I think that mainly boils down to me not being familiar with how it's supposed to work. This was my first time using OS 2 after all. So, is it a better DOS than DOS and a better Windows than Windows? Well, it really feels like there is some good technology at the core of it. Not being able to use multimedia features in both Windows and OS2 applications at the same time is a bit annoying though. The DOS and Windows support is pretty good, but it feels like you need a pretty good computer to make good use of it. But other parts, like the Windows management, doesn't feel like it scales well with more advanced use. If I had a better computer and could get used to the user interface, then yeah, maybe. Right, we're back at the real computer. So, how do I get Windows 3 back? By studying the manual for OS2, it does apparently automatically set up a dual boot, allowing you to switch between DOS and OS2. So I boot from a DOS floppy and run this boot manager utility. But sadly, OS2 hadn't gotten far enough into the install to actually save my DOS files, so I can't restore them. All is not lost, I should be able to restore DOS with the sys command, which will overwrite the OS2 boot files. So I start by restoring my config sys and oddexec.bat files, which I backed up before starting the installation. But when I run sys, it claims there isn't enough space on my C drive. I might have a hunch as to why though. FAT12 and FAT16 has a fixed size for the root directory, so there's a limit to how many files and folders you can have there. And while my C drive was a bit messy before this OS2 attempt, it's a lot worse now. So I tried removing some OS2 stuff from the root drive, and now I'm able to run the sys command. As I'm editing this video, I'm starting to wonder if this is the reason OS2 failed to install, but the root directory just got full. The files it copied wasn't going to the root directory when it crashed though, so I'm not sure if that makes sense. But with that, I can boot back into DOS again. And from DOS, I'm able to start Windows up just like before. It's as if I never tried to install OS2 at all, except... it appears OS2 installed Adobe Type Manager in my Windows installation. Is that how IBM got out of Microsoft's TrueType trap? But once here, I can start clearing out all the clutter from this failed OS2 install. And with that, I guess I'm back where I started. I did however keep some souvenirs from the multimedia add-on that OS2 installed. But I think that's all I can do for this video. Check back next week when I try my luck with Windows 95 instead. Until then, thank you for watching.